Well, hello. Get the audio check out of the way real quick, and we'll bring Ralph Ellis on stage with us. It has been exactly 366 days. He was a guest on this channel, kind of blew my mind with some of the Jesus of Edessa material, and sent me down a rabbit hole. We'll be discussing that today. But it was October 28th of last year. He was on the channel, and I don't know if he and John planned this. I didn't even notice it till about an hour ago, but it's the exact date this year that we talked to him last year. You'll have to ask Big John if and him if they did something, because I was unaware of the coincidence. Let's see. I wouldn't put it past Big John. All right, so we have good audio. Excellent. So I'm going to bring Ralph straight on stage with us. How you doing, Ralph?
Very well, thanks, Jason. Yes, I'm cardinal today, just in case people are wondering. You're allowed to choose your own pronouns nowadays, so I choose cardinal. Why not?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I'm a little more uncouth, and I'm not as refined, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that. So my own pronoun would probably, I'm not buying it. There's about there's about 99% of the stuff out there in the field. We're in competition, Ralph, in the field. We're in competition with a lot of people who don't know what they're talking about, and they're not willing to look. They're not willing to learn. I will say that your research is very compelling, and I am impressed. I'm going to talk about some of that. I'm equally impressed with my own research, because I know what it's taken over decades to put all this together. And you and I are a perfect example of two different paradigms that are completely different, and yet neither one of them are untrue. You have shown that I'm convinced Jesus was a historical figure. Now I am equally convinced, and one does not negate the other. I am equally convinced that the Jesus of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did not exist. So these do not conflict at all. Once people hear what you have to say, once you cite what Moses of Corine, and Flavius Josephus have brought to the table about the family at Edessa, the royal family of Edessa, and what was going on in AD 64 with the Romans, and all the crossover. It's amazing. The Fisher Kings. You blew my mind when I was going through this. I was like, wow. I says, this guy's putting together historical material that actually shows there is a historical basis that's easily identifiable about Jesus. And yet, not a bit of it conflicts with my own assertion that the Jesus of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John is a fiction. So crazy, man. So I just want to welcome you back to my channel, man, and say that you're always welcome here. You could actually come to my channel and do a video for every single book that you have, because they are fascinating.
Yes,
I'm about three-thirds. I'm about 2/4 of the way. Well, so that's not quite halfway. I'm going through your material on the Tempest and the Exodus right now in this book, and I'm going through your citation of the Egyptian papyri that seem to confirm the Exodus account.
Yes. Yeah, that's interesting. That all of that was interesting, because it did seem to confirm that there was historical facts behind the Exodus story and the whole of the Old Testament story. Not entirely as it's presented to us in modern terms, but there was verifiable history behind it. So that was all very interesting. And pretty much I've found the same for the New Testament, that there are historical precedents for all of the stories that are given in the Gospels. And yeah, we'll probably go through some of that.
Sure.
So the story remains... Sorry,
I
was just going to say the story remains the same, but it's different. And we will see how that is true as we run through this.
Oh, you know what? It's not just the biblical material. I'm about to do one final video on Atlantis, and this is after data mining about 40 books in my library and going through material that I haven't gone through before. I'm gonna do one final video. There's no more need for me to go through anymore, but the whole Atlantis narrative, it does have a historical basis as well, but just not 10,000 years ago. Every element unfolded in the 13th century BC. So not just the Atlantis story, but even the Trojan War. The more we research the Trojan War, and we find out, okay, well, Homer may have been embellishing because he came out of a Mediterranean dark age and he didn't have the frames of reference for history and chronology like we do today. He spoke more in mythological terms, but still, he's literally describing the Sea Peoples Federation invasions of the Mediterranean.
Yes.
So
I say the same. Yes, we're on the same page with that one.
Yeah, the Exodus is the same. Anybody who has studied the Amuru, the ancient capital of Mitanni and the Amorites, they will find out, man, the biblical story of the Israelites were the Hyksos. The Hyksos kings that were hated by the Egyptians were the Israelites of the Old Testament. And the whole story, there is a basis, in fact, for it. The more I research the Amuru, which were also called Hyksos, they were called shepherd kings to the Egyptians, but other cultures called them Amuru, which was Western Semitic. It literally meant Westerners, but their capital was Mari in the kingdom of Mitanni. And these people were Israelite, were of Israelite stock. Egyptians hated them. I believe you had referenced the Hyksos. I don't remember what your opinion is of them, but I remember you had mentioned the Hyksos 2 or 3 times in this book, but I haven't got to any.
Yes, I say the same.
You quoted Josephus. That's right.
That's right. Yeah, the Hyksos were or Hyksos were the Israelites, because that's what Josephus says. You know, Josephus is in agreement.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind. So yeah, there are many things that have been conveyed to us as traditional, mythological, or whatever, but there is a historical basis, in fact.
And that's a good example of what I was just talking about, that the story is different but the same.
Yeah.
The Israelite story, Exodus, is the same. It's just that it is the Hyksos Exodus, or the Hyksos Exodus, which is almost identical, but happened like 350 years earlier. So the story is the same, but slightly different.
Right. No doubt. So something clicked for me when I was going through your material on the Roman, the Jews. Now I understand. So the Edessian Jews are the ones that defeated the Roman legion, and Vespasian responded with 3 legions, right? And
Yes.
So it kind of makes the whole Crusades make sense now, because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that the Crusades, European Crusades, many of the Europeans believe they're the descendants of Israelites. So these nations, through the papacy or whatever, it's never made sense why the very first crusade, they didn't go deliver Jerusalem. All the other crusades were about Jerusalem, but the very first crusade was to go secure Edessa. Isn't that unusual?
And yeah, that was very interesting. And it was even more interesting that I didn't know about that until after I'd written the book. So I wrote this 600-page book on Edessa, and I still hadn't come across that detail because I wasn't looking at it. And then I saw that
you were looking at history 1,000 years earlier.
Yeah, and then I saw that the first crusade went to Edessa. So that was very interesting.
Yeah, well, it's like, what did they know in the Middle Ages? Because I mean, this was basically a Norman operation. The Crusades would have never happened without the Normans. The Normans brought the knights. The Normans brought the technology. They brought the knights, the education. And what's crazy is they also brought the history. Most people don't know this, but the Normans had Jewish retainers. They used Jewish as bookkeepers. They used the Jews as translators. The Normans were empire builders, and they're the ones that spearheaded this whole crusades. And for them to go straight for Edessa and not Jerusalem is really a compliment to your research and your theory.
Yeah, it's nice when these elements come out of the woodwork, which confirm a book I'd already written. And that's happened on several occasions. It happened with the Huqoq mosaic. It happened with, as we were talking about, the First Crusade, and it happened with the history of Malabar, which again I did not know about when I wrote the Edessa book. So this is the
History of the Church of Malabar. All right.
Yeah, in India. This is the Edessan Church in India.
That's so they're not Nestorians.
No, these would have been not Jews, but they would have been the Church of Jesus and James. So this church was established by Thomas, who was the twin brother of Jesus. And so this book goes back a bit.
Wow, that's my kind of book there.
Yeah, it was written in 1694, this book. So this was a history of the Portuguese going to Malabar, which is in India, and discovering the Church of Jesus and James in India. And this was the first church to ever be established. It was established in AD 57.
Wow. So what mosaic did you just quote?
Sorry, what was?
You said you had made a discovery about a mosaic. Is that the zodiac mosaic?
Yeah, that's the Archaix mosaic. We'll go through that because it's probably the earliest image of Jesus ever made.
I think okay. There's like a bifurcated opinion about that in academia. I think they date it to the fourth century AD, but I think I was reading your research, and I believe in your research you found evidence in Josephus that it's actually dated to the 1st century AD.
Yeah, that's the Hamat Tveria zodiac, and I think
it's a Jewish zodiac with Helios. It kind of mixes the Greek with
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, we can go through that one because that is an interesting zodiac because it may have belonged to Jesus himself, because Josephus says it belongs to Jesus, Jesus of Gamala, and I think that he is linked to the biblical Jesus. So
okay.
that is interesting as well. Perhaps we can show people where Edessa is, because we're going to talk about that a lot. So can I do a share screen?
Absolutely. Let's see. Let me find.
Let's do a window, and if I share that should come up with a map.
Got it.
Yep. Okay, we've got it. That's good. I'll zoom in very slightly. So we've got a map of the Near East here. We've got Judea down the bottom, Jerusalem, Mediterranean Sea. So we're running up through Syria, Damascus, up to Aleppo. And then if we keep going towards the northeast, we come to Edessa.
Right.
And it's in modern Turkey, but it used to be known as being in Syria.
I was about to say that. I thought it was in Syria, but it looks like it's in Turkey.
Yeah, it's in modern Turkey. But the important thing is it's across the Euphrates. So it is beyond the Euphrates, which is the term that Josephus uses time and time again. And it is beyond the Euphrates. Today it's known as Sanliurfa. And it was a micro kingdom. Well, actually, it wasn't so micro. It was probably about the size of England. So it's reasonable. But, this is a big place over here.
Right.
And it stretched from Edessa all the way down through Haran, down to Palmyra. So it ran all the way down here in a big sort of square on the borders between Rome and Parthia, or Persia. And it was a border state that traded between these two empires and also traded them off one against the other. It's a bit like sort of modern Ukraine getting stuck between Europe and Russia, sort of thing. And always on the verge of being destroyed by one or other of the sides. So that was the mini kingdom that they ran, the Edessan monarchy. And the Edessan monarchy, of course, have been deleted from history. So if you go through the works of Josephus and do a word search for Edessa or any of the monarchy of Edessa, it will just say nothing found.
Wow. I noticed. Have you ever done, like, do you have an etymological dictionary or reference? Have you looked up Edessa? Because there's early Christian writings and Christian traditions where Jesus's name wasn't Jesus. It was Essa, ESSA.
Yes. Well, that was the interesting thing, because the king that I was looking at from the Edessan monarchy, of course, was King Issa. That's his name. He's in the works of Josephus. He's he's called Izates or Isa or
Yeah, the reason I'm
Isast.
asking is because like this is not Arabic, but if it was, it would be AD. It would be like the place of Edessa.
Yeah, well, in the Quran, Jesus is known as Issa again, so we have the same name within the
Okay,
Quran.
all right.
So that's interesting that in the East they still use the name Issa for Jesus, and that's the name of the Edessan king I was looking at. So if we come, you see, the trouble is we're talking about places and events that people are not familiar with. So let's if I can just ground us on why I'm thinking that the Gospels may be linked to this obscure place called Edessa. The best, I think, to start with is John the Baptist, because, well, we all know John the Baptist, but what people don't seem to realize is he is a real historical character, not just from the Gospels, but from real history. We have the history of John, or some of the history of John the Baptist, and one of the events was obviously he got beheaded. He was executed, and this caused a war between Petra and Judea, because this John the Baptist was beheaded because Herod Antipas wanted to divorce his wife, who was Pharsalus. She was the daughter of the king of Petra, the rose-red city, and marry Herodias. And it was John the Baptist who piped up and said, that's illegal, that's against the law. And because of his intervention, he got himself executed. Now, we have some historical accounts of this, because King Aretas of Petra got upset by this and sent his army up to punish the Judeans. And so from Josephus, he says, King Aretas made war between him and Herod Antipas, and raised armies on both sides and prepared for war. And when they had joined battle, all of Herod's army was destroyed by the treachery of some fugitives, who, though they were from the tetrarchy of King Philip, they joined with Aretas to defeat the Judeans. So here we have this battle between Petra and Judea, but also there was the treachery, as he says, of some fugitives from Syria, from the north of the country. And you have to wonder, this is Josephus talking, Josephus Flavius. He knows everything that's happening in this area. So why doesn't he name who these people were? Why does he say they were fugitives? He's obviously.
Well, by the time he was writing I like Josephus. Oh my God, it's extremely detailed. But when he was writing his material, though, he was writing it for the Romans. So
that's the main reason why he says this, and we know that he knew about this because we have the same commentary from Moses of Cyrene, who was a Syriac historian. And so Moses of Cyrene says, King Abgarus of Edessa allied himself with King Aretas of Petra and gave him some auxiliary troops to make war upon Herod Antipas. Being sharply attacked, Herod's troops were defeated thanks to the help of the brave Edessans. As if by divine providence, vengeance was taken for the death of John the Baptist. So now we have a conflation here, and you need these two different perspectives in order to see what's happening in this history. So first of all, we know from this that Josephus has deliberately deleted the Edessans. So Josephus calls them fugitives from Syria, deliberately hiding who they are. Moses of Cyrene says that they were the brave Edessans, the army of the Edessan monarchy. But further to that, he explains why they were there. Now, we know why Aretas was there having this war. It was because his daughter had been sent back. His honor had been slighted, and so he went to war with the Judeans. But why did the Edessans come down all the way from northern Syria to join in this war? Well, Moses of Corine says, as if by divine vengeance was taken for the death of John the Baptist. So the Edessans were down there because John the Baptist had been murdered or executed. That directly implies that John the Baptist was a prince or priest of Edessa. So immediately from that one little paragraph from these two historians, we have an idea that John the Baptist was a potential priest or prince of Edessa. And if John the Baptist was linked to Edessa, then what about Jesus? Because, of course, Jesus and John the Baptist were cousins. So if John the Baptist was a prince of Edessa, then what about Jesus? You see how we can very quickly link Jesus back to Edessa. And that's interesting because now we have a totally different version of the Gospels. How did this happen? Well, we have another one, which is the Great Famine. So we have, again, this is not very well taught, but we have this very famous queen, Queen Helena, who was the queen of Adiabene, which is supposedly a place over in Iraq by Mosul. That is somehow linked always with Judea. She became the queen of Judea in the AD 50s. So we have this Queen Helena. However, Moses of Corine says that Queen Helena of the Adiabene was actually Queen Helena of Edessa. She was married to King Abgarus of Edessa. All these strange names that people have never heard of. So the famous Queen Helena was actually a queen of Edessa. And that's important because we come to the quote from Acts of the Apostles about Agabus. I better get the quote here. So if I type in Agabus, so as I said, all of these people from Edessa have been deleted from history. They cannot be found in any of the works of Josephus Flavius, and they cannot be found in the gospel texts, even though they are linked so closely with gospel events. However, I think that's because they've had a little bit of a name change, and one of these name changes is that they. Where's the quote from Acts of the Apostles? Okay,
Abacus is in the Pauline material, right?
Yeah, that's right. Comes from Acts of the Apostles 11:28. If people want to look it up, and it says Agabus stood up and signified that there would be a great famine throughout the whole world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar. So we're talking about AD 48, AD 50, something like that. Then the disciples determined to send famine relief money unto their brethren that lived in Judea, which they did, and they sent it to the elders by the hands of Saul and Barnabas. Okay, so that's a normal sort of gospel event that people might have read and not really understood what it meant and how it was linked. It's just there in the Bible. Well, the thing is that this famine relief money is very famous within history. It was sent by Queen Helena of Adiabene. We have lots of texts to say that. But of course, now we know that Queen Helena was the queen of Edessa, and she was married to King Abgarus of Edessa. Now hold on a minute. So we have a conflation of events and names. So the Agabus in Acts of the Apostles is King Abgarus of Edessa. So he does get a mention in Acts of the Apostles, because it was King Agbarus and Queen Helena that gave this famine relief money to Judea. And the Acts of the Apostles story, these people were supposed to be in Antioch. So some of the disciples, some of the apostles were supposed to be in Antioch. Barnabas and Saul and Barnabas were supposed to be in Antioch, and they were sent with the money down to Judea.
How
But of course,
interesting that Antioch is so close to Edessa, and the scripture does read that Christianity, I mean, the believers first became called Christians at Antioch.
yeah, but the thing is that Edessa was called Antioch.
Okay.
So the
All
full
right.
name for Edessa was Antioch Edessa.
Oh,
So
okay.
when Acts of the Apostles is talking about apostles being in Antioch, are they talking about Antioch on the Mediterranean Sea, or are they talking about Antioch Edessa? Well, now we know that Agabus is most likely to be King Abgarus, who is sending this famine relief money down to Judea. But the thing is, it says that this money was sent by the hands of Saul and Barnabas. So that means that Saul, which is St. Paul, of course,
And isn't he from Tarsus, which is right there by Antioch in northern Syria?
That's, yes, just along the Mediterranean coast. He was supposed to be from Tarsus. But it means that Saul must have been an ambassador of Edessa. So we've just linked one of the key characters from the New Testament, from the Gospels. We've linked him directly back to Edessa, and John the Baptist back to Edessa. Suddenly, with these two paragraphs, that's all we've looked at so far.
So what is this? I noticed in your material that when you're going, I understand you're being conservative, but you don't really put a lot of dates in your books at all. You kind of avoid the chronology, although you present your material sequentially in the order that it happened. But it's kind of what you're talking about right now, because the traditional Christian chronology is 33 AD for the crucifixion of Christ. John the Baptist beheaded, 29, 30 AD, something like that. That's the traditional. But this can't be what you're talking about. You must be talking about events 30 years later.
Yeah, 40 years later.
40 years later.
I call this the chronological chasm, and I came across this way back in 97 when I first wrote my first book, which was Jesus, Last of the Pharaohs.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, my contention all along for the last 30 more years is that these events actually happened in the AD 60s, and it was to do with the Jewish revolt.
Yes,
and this little
I
graph.
I agree with you, because it's the first century. The first century is the dearth of material. It's the second century when all the Christian material starts getting widely known, published, copies making it. All the manuscripts begin appearing. So yeah, this
Yes.
you're showing 30, 40 years after what is the 33 AD deal. I'm on board with that, because the traditional gospel narrative unfolding in 29 to 33 doesn't work in the historical record at all.
No, it doesn't work in the historical record, and it also means they need 40 years of oral transmission, because none of the Gospels were written until after the AD 70s.
Right.
So they have to say that, oh, okay, there was just this 40 years of oral transmission, and then they wrote them down later. And you think, why was that? These people were literate. Why didn't they write them down at the time?
Yeah, Josephus couldn't have relied on oral for his book. His books are massive.
Well, precisely, yes. Yes,
so
you couldn't remember all of that.
He was certainly referring to other library records.
Yes, and he wrote his material, of course, in the AD 70s. So we have this jump, and this is a pictorial description of that jump by Lena Einhorn. And you'll see there's a group of events. These are all similar events here in the AD 30s, early AD 30s, and similar events here in the AD 50s. So pictorially here, she's saying that there has been a deliberate duplication here. So those on the top here are all from the Gospels, of course, which puts all of these events back in the AD 30s. And these are from Josephus, similar events, all in the AD 50s going up to the AD 60s. And what she's obviously saying is pretty much what I said in my Jesus Last of the Pharaohs, that this information has been duplicated. So it actually happened here in the AD 60s, and it's been sent back, deliberately so, to the AD 30s in order to separate it from the Jewish revolt. And that was deliberately done, because if you change the date, then anyone who is hunting for the historical Jesus in the AD 30s will never find him.
This is why they're all in trying to prove the historicity of the gospel narrative Jesus. They're always citing the interpolations, which have been shown to be interpolations in Tacitus and Tatian, and I forgot, there's another author where later manuscripts showed that the earlier manuscripts don't have these little additives to them, these interpolations. But what's really fundamental here about this 40-year discrepancy, the whole great 25-year Justinian darkness began a period for which the Roman papacy decided to create a whole new calendar. I know you're familiar with it, the Anno Domini calendar. The Anno Domini calendar wasn't even created until 526. It wasn't even used widely in Europe for 300 years. But 526 AD is when they created the calendar, and they based it off what they calculated off the Paschal cycle. They literally backdated 526 years to what they thought was year one, based off this. And this whole 40-year discrepancy here completely messes that up as well, showing that our modern AD calendar is so off from the events that it was supposed to date. However, if you're a simulationist like I am, it's absolutely perfect, because it shows the deception. The study of the calendar itself shows how many of these events were absolutely arbitrary and invented.
We can show, because people might not agree with this chronological chasm, as I call it, but there are similar events that have been duplicated, and one of those, the obvious one, is Zacharias. So in the Gospels, we find Matthew 23:35, if people want to look it up. So Zacharias, son of Barachias, who was murdered between the temple and the altar. So it was a very specific type of death, and this was lamented by Jesus himself. So it has to be AD 20s, doesn't it, or early AD 30s? But of course, during the Jewish war, so we move on like 40 years, we have Zacharias, son of Baruch, who was murdered between the temple and the altar. That comes from Jewish War 454, from the works of Josephus. So we have the same death 40 years later. And this has been known about for decades, for centuries, of course, but people will not run with this discrepancy, because it conflicts so much with the standard biblical narrative. So if we get someone like Adam Clarke, who is a very, very famous theologian from the Victorian era, and he says, some think that Jesus refers in the spirit of prophecy to the murder of Zacharias, son of Baruch, the one mentioned by Josephus.
Yeah.
A rich Jew who was judged, condemned, and massacred in the temple by Idumean zealots, during the Jewish revolt. So people have known about this discrepancy for ages, but they could not accept it. So they just have to say, oh, well, Adam Clarke says the spirit of prophecy, that Jesus was, the Gospels were prophesying this death.
Right.
But no, I think it is a real death, and the Gospel events are talking about the Jewish revolt. We have another one in Zizit ben Hakasith, who is mentioned in the Talmud. So the Gospel says about this, he's talking about the aristocrats, the scribes and the Pharisees, that lay heavy burdens on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move these burdens with one of their fingers. A typical complaint about the class system, of course. The poor old workers and their overseers and their lords. These people, the lords, enlarge their phylacteries and lengthen their tassels on their garments, and they love the uppermost rooms at the feasts and the chief seats in the synagogues. Matthew 23, 4 and 5. Now, that doesn't really tell you anything about this. You wouldn't know this is talking about Zizit ben Hakaseth unless you had read the Talmud. Only the Talmud can explain what that is talking about. So the Talmud says that Zizit ben Hakaseth was so called, and he was mocked in the same fashion in the Talmud. Zizit ben Hakaseth was so called because his tassels, his zizith, used to trail on the cushions, the kesef. So it's a play of words on his names. So when Jesus is talking about these people with their tassels who have the chief seats in the synagogues, he is talking about Zizit ben Hakaseth. The trouble is that Zizit ben Hakaseth is an AD 60s leader of the Jewish revolt. Nothing to do with the AD 20s and the early AD 30s. So again, time and time again, we see hints within the gospel events that this was actually an AD 60s story. I mean, Jesus himself in Luke 19:41 says, "The days will come when your enemies will cast a trench about thee." He's talking about Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So your enemies will cast a trench about thee and compass thee around and keep thee in on every side and lay you level with the ground and not leave one stone upon another. Well, that is a quote from Josephus Flavius about the Jewish revolt, when the Romans put a fence and a trench all the way around Jerusalem.
I've read in critical material showing that exact quote right there is a data point for those who want to claim that there is no way Matthew, Mark, and Luke and John could have been written until after the fall of Jerusalem.
Yeah. Now, you have the two choices. Again, the theologians will say this is prophecy. Jesus was just prophesying the fact that, Jerusalem was going to be destroyed.
Right.
Alternatively, you can say that actually these events were AD 60s events during the Jewish revolt. And that's how Jesus knew that this was going to happen. And, the disciples who were writing the Gospels and so on. And so for many, many reasons, this has to be an AD 60s story. And it only really works because all of the events, because that's always been the trouble, isn't it? The Gospels have all of these stories, and you can't find any of these stories in the AD 20s, early AD 30s. But if you go to the AD 60s, you can find all of these events just sitting there with the same sort of characters, same names quite often.
Right.
So for many reasons, it has to be an AD 60s story.
Well, I mean, I just want to clarify one thing, because I know we have a lot of people listening, and I'm on board. I'm on board absolutely with the whole AD 60s. I'm even going to define it more to AD 64, AD 65, when these events were unfolding, all the way up till the great 3-year war. Well,
the Jewish revolt, yes.
Yes, AD 70 all the way to Masada, but in 73. But all I want to clarify is that the historical data points, such as trade routes, names of cities, individuals, interpersonal relationships between individuals that we can isolate in the historical record in the AD 60s that are attached to people that you have identified in the New Testament, the crossover with Josephus and how he is verifying these things. I'm on board with all that. My only contention is that someone else took these historical details. You've identified that they've transposed them 40 years, and that's cool with me. I agree with you. My only issue is who in the hell put in the text to like it's almost as if they're damaging the credibility of the Edessian kingship, the royal line, by saying he was born of a virgin, he walked on water, he turned water into wine, he cured the blind. who put all these attachments in here that don't have anything to do with the actual history?
Well, they do have something to do with the history. The trouble is, it's just been misinterpreted, so you don't realize that it has, anything to do with it. I mean, the water to wine, for instance, is a real event. It's just that, again, you need to be in the AD 50s, AD 60s in order to see what it is. This was a trick jug that was made by Hieron of Alexandria. And we have the original technical drawings and the original descriptions by Hieron as to how to make these jugs. So Hieron was the Leonardo da Vinci of the 1st century. He was the machine man, they called him. And he made all of these wonderful, highly technical machines, including the world's first, as it were, jet engine. He made the aerophile. He made
the steam engine, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's like a steam engine. Yeah, he made pumps for like for a fire engine. He made birds that sing.
These are things we explore in Archaix. Well, we have talked about the Antikythera device many times and the implications of what it means to have a differential geared, mechanism of this sophistication. Means that there was manufacturing somewhere. They had to manufacture those cogs and those wheels and all that.
But one of those things that he liked to make was trick jugs that turned water into wine.
Okay.
So this is a known trick jug. We still have the drawings of them. And he made 4 of these different jugs of different sizes, specifically to turn water into wine. This was a well-known 1st century trick. But the trouble is, for the Jesus character, is this was a trick that was employed by monarchs, by aristocracy. These were hugely expensive things to have, and you had them.
That would kind of lend credence to the whole Jesus was a king narrative then.
Absolutely. You had them to entertain your guests. And of course, where did this happen? It happened at the wedding at Cana, which was the wedding of Jesus and Mary Magdalene when they got married. And of course, he would want to, as a prince of Edessa, he would want to entertain his guests. And so he had a trick jug from Hieron of Alexandria.
Wow.
And so, yes, that's the miracle. It's a real event. But of course, it's translated within the Gospels, of course, as being this, wonderful miracle rather than real history. And that's how I say the story remains the same, but it's different.
I can buy these type of correlates I can agree with, such as the virgin birth. The virgin birth is an ancient concept. It goes back to Sargon of Akkad. Sargon of Akkad claimed to be born of a virgin, and he got away with it because under Amorite law, and Enitu priestesses were considered Vestal virgins, even though they were having sex in the temple. You understand? They were still considered spiritually a virgin. So he was born. He didn't know he had no father. He had no father. So he was like born of God. He had no father because he was actually born of a temple prostitute, but they were considered sacred. So these virgins, which weren't virgins, would give birth, and he was the result. Sargon of Akkad, also called Naram Sin. So I get the whole concept of virgin born, but in the gospel version, they kind of pass it off as a miraculous event, virgin born.
They would do, but that's the whole point of this. I call it history with fairy dust being put upon it, which is the spiritual.
So it was it's political propaganda.
Absolutely.
You just may convince me the whole gospel narrative is absolutely true along this line of thinking. I can change my mind with accurate data. There's no doubt.
But Mary the mother was a Vestal virgin, exactly as you've explained. That comes from the Proto-Evangelium of James, the birth narrative of James. And that says that Mary the mother was a Vestal virgin at the temple.
Okay. So
there she was.
I want to add another detail.
Yeah,
so
she was a virgin.
We have the water and the wine. We have the Vestal virgin. You and I could go back and forth like that all day. Those two are out the way. I want to offer one now that you're not going to have to convince me of, because at the birth of Jesus, there was supposed to be an unusual star appearing in the sky. So the first century AD as recorded by so many different, I have so many historians that recorded all kinds of atmospheric and sky phenomena for the first century. And it was absolutely packed with all kinds of unusual things appearing in the sky. We could take our pick. We could take our pick from all the 80s, 30s, and 40s. We had unusual stars, maybe even what was documented as a nova. So that one point could be shelved by me. There's too many incidents in the first century of these sightings. But do you have any crossover with, like, it wouldn't even be amazing to me anymore about three kings from the east, three magi coming, because if Jesus was of the nobility, then his birth would have been somewhat of a big deal.
Yes, well, with the star, of course, Mary, being a princess, would have been an incarnation of Isis, and of course, Isis is Ast or Ashtoreth, Astarte. And therefore she is Venus. So Mary herself.
Man, I'm about to blow your mind. What a crossover!
She is an
Ashtaroth
incarnation.
Carneum.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that?
Sorry, second.
I'm about to blow your mind because you just mentioned the association between Mary, ancient Mari. Yes, Mari is an Egyptian epithet also for Isis. Isis being Ishtar. Ishtar comes from Ashtoreth, which was the northern Syria. And on all old biblical maps, I have some, there is a city, I just remember, there is a city that the Israelites knew about, called Ashtaroth Carnaim, and it means star of the two horns. And if you look on old maps of Israel, Canaan, Babylonia, the Near East, the Fertile Crescent, you will find that Ashtaroth Carnaim is almost exactly where you just showed me Edessa is.
Yep.
But it's a city called Ashtaroth Carnaim.
Yes. So yes, Mary herself would have been an incarnation of Venus, and Venus is the star of Venus, of course, and that she still indicated that. If you look at a lot of the Renaissance images of Mary the Mother, she's quite often she's got the star of Venus on her lapel. So people have known about this for a long time, that she was the star. And the three kings, that comes from Mary coming from Parthia. Let me just look up a quick quote. So yeah. This comes from the.
Are you trying to share your screen?
No, I was just looking up a quote so I could actually quote it.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, this comes from Cicero. This comes from the origins of where this biblical nativity comes from, because I think that this queen, I think the whole of the Edessan monarchy came out of Parthia, which is Persia. And how did they get there in the first place? Because these people were Egyptians. Well, it's explained by Cicero. So we're going back to the time of Caesar here. Ides of March 44 BC, and Caesar is murdered in the Senate, and Cleopatra was there as his consort at the time, and she runs back to Egypt as soon as Caesar is murdered. And Cicero said, "I am grieved to hear of Tertia's loss." Tertia is another aristocratic lady. "Of an unexpected child." So she had had an abortion. "But I should be glad of such a loss in the case of Queen Cleopatra, and that expected scion of the breed of Caesar."
Wow.
So So yeah, Cleopatra was pregnant when she ran away from Rome in 44 BC. She was pregnant, and what Cicero didn't want was an heir to Caesar coming from
Right.
Egypt.
Right.
Queen Cleopatra they didn't want an Egyptian to be the
Yeah.
next
Well,
emperor of Rome.
more specifically, Ralph, they did not want a Ptolemy of Macedonian descent ruling over Rome at all.
Yes.
Not
Yeah, I
after
mean,
they had gone to the Macedonian Wars. The Romans they were not going to have a Ptolemy ruling in Rome.
yes, yes, she was dually hate. She was Egyptian and she was Ptolemaic. So yeah, that's so Rome didn't want that, and but then the problem goes away. So Cicero is happy. The problem goes away. So why did the problem go away? Well, either Cleopatra did have an abortion, or the child was a girl, because a girl could not become the next Caesar.
Oh man, are you making a connection here that the daughter of Cleopatra would have been the father of Jesus? I mean, the mother of Jesus?
Grandmother, yes.
Grandmother of Jesus. Okay.
Because
It would have been grandmother, yeah, because it's 44
yes,
BC.
it's too long. So we jump on 20 years, and the next emperor, who is Octavian, of course, has to do a deal with Parthia, because Parthia is the big enemy of Rome. Parthia had already destroyed 3 legions of Rome and taken
the Parthians had been the enemy all the way up until the days of Julian the Apostate. What, 6th century AD? 6th century
all
AD.
that way through, yes.
Yeah, 600-year-old enemy.
Yeah, so they had to be placated, and so Augustus goes to Parthia, sends his ambassadors over there, and sends a concubine. Well, first of all, he sends to Juba II, or Yuba II of Mauritania. Mauritania is North Africa.
Yeah,
he gives.
I have a book on King Juba. King Juba II.
Yeah.
Yeah,
a very successful small monarchy there. They had quite a nice civilization there.
Yeah, they always feared Rome would end up doing to them what they did to the Carthaginians.
Yeah, so yes, indeed, yes. Some of the finest temples and whatever over there. Anyway, Yuba II got the daughter of Cleopatra as a wife. So he got a very prestigious diplomatic wife, was the daughter, and she's called Cleopatra Selene. But then Octavian goes across to Parthia, which is the great enemy of Rome, and gives Phraates IV, who's the king of Parthia, a concubine, a prostitute.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, that's not going to work. That's a real slight on the honor of the Parthians. He's going to declare war on Rome if you do that. But anyway, that's the story. But Phraates IV was so impressed by his concubine that he made her the chief wife and queen of all Parthia. Now, why did that happen? Well, for many reasons that I go through in my book. I think that her name was Thea Musa Aurania, Queen Thea Musa Aurania. Again, lots of names that people have never heard of before, but she's a very famous queen. And another person who's gone missing from history, because people were so... I'm just looking for a quick screen share on this one. People didn't know who this... Where is... here it is. I was going to do a quick screen share. So where's... I've got too many windows here. Where are you?
It's the story of my life.
So let's do a quick screen share. I found where you are.
I'm wondering if the Parthian calendar has something to do with these events, because the Saka calendar that comes out of Parthia was the big calendar change at this time. It started, year 1 was 76 AD. The year 76 of our calendar is year 1 of the great Parthian Saka calendar.
Okay.
And it's largely a Christian type calendar. But
that would be worth looking at.
It's called the Saka calendar, and it started in 76 AD. And the reason the reason I know this straight out of my head is because I have a chronology that's in Archaix and in my published books that I've talked about frequently. It's called the Dark Satellite Timeline. And 76 AD is perfectly it was one of the appearances of the dark satellite in the sky. And it appeared as a great spear in the sky and started all kinds of terror and all that. And in the east, the Parthians started that event began their calendar. It's called the Saka, Saka calendar. Because we're talking about events in AD 70 to AD 73 that were solidified. Rome obliterated, Jerusalem and all this. So Vespasian did his work in 76, followed this, but 76 Saka calendar ended up being a Christian timeline. So I don't know.
Okay. So hopefully we've got that should be a screen share. Is that not sharing?
Oh, I see it. Yeah.
Okay, right, you've got it. Yeah, that's the water to wine jug that was made by Hieron of Alexandria. As you can see, there's two compartments inside it, and it's operated by putting your thumb over the air hole up here at K at the top, and that will differentiate between water and wine. So it's a very clever little trick jug, and these were well known about.
That's great. Yeah. Man, that's great.
But going back to Queen Theomusa, people thought that this was a wild tale by Josephus Flavius because they couldn't believe it was true. And we had no evidence of Queen Theomusa because she had been deleted from history. But
it's just sophisticated sleight of hand.
Yeah. And then they started finding coins of her. So this is Queen Theomusa Orania. She was the queen of Parthia, and this is her son, Phraatesses. And there was a rumor that she had married her son, which is entirely possible. They used to do this sort of thing. And so, yeah, she turned out to be a real queen. But she murdered her husband in 2 BC. So that was the end of Phraates IV. And she assumed to be the queen of Parthia. And that's why she has coins with her image on them. But then that didn't go down too well with the aristocracy of Parthia. And so they were kicked out in AD 4. So in AD 4, just at about the right sort of time, this monarchy was kicked out of Parthia. And they went westwards into Syria, and they settled in Edessa. And this is how I think that this monarchy in Edessa came about, because Moses of Corine says that it was King Agbaras V who actually founded Edessa as a principality. And I think it was to do with these royals coming out of Parthia. And initially I thought they would just be vagabonds, because, you look at the nativity story, because this is the nativity story. What is the nativity story? It's about a royal family, because Jesus was said to be a king, on the move for some reason, nowhere to stay, having to be in a like poor lodgings in a stable, and visited by the 3 magi, which is what you were talking about. And here are the 3 magi. Now, why on earth would the magi, who were the priests and kingmakers of Parthia, be coming to the birth of a Jewish artisan? Makes no sense. However, any child born to this couple would be a potential king of Parthia and Rome and Egypt and Judea, the most well-connected monarchy in the whole of the world at that time. They were descended from all of the monarchs of that region. And so, of course, the Parthian magi, the Persian magi, would have gone to this birth because he was a potential king of all of Parthia. And that is why I think this story was created.
Is that a 3rd century frieze?
Yeah, this comes from Rome. So this is a Roman mosaic.
So before Edessa was called Edessa, I looked it up. I was really curious. It was called Rojas in Aramaic. Have you come across that before?
Yes, I have.
I also found out that this is an Alexander. It's shortly after Alexander of Macedon became Alexander the Great. This city was founded, and by a Nicator, and it was one of Alexander. You remember you mentioned earlier the Tetrarch. Were you referring at all to the four generals that became four rulers after Alexander's death?
No, the Tetrarchs are the Jewish Tetrarchs, so
Oh, okay. So the
similar.
Hasmonean
Yes.
kings.
They're the sons of Herod the Great.
Okay, so yeah, it's interesting that one of the four great generals of Alexander of Macedon came over here, and the reason I'm mentioning this is because there's a correlate here. You're linking Cleopatra. Cleopatra was a Ptolemy. The Ptolemies were Macedonian royalty, and they were ruling over Egypt. Well, here we have crossover with the Macedonians again, because Edessa was literally founded by one of the generals of Alexander the Great.
Yeah, and that's why it was known as Antioch Edessa. So its full name was Antioch Edessa. So there's lots of room for confusion here between Antioch on the Mediterranean coast, which everybody assumes when they're reading the Gospels. They're assuming that, because the apostles are going backwards and forwards from Jerusalem to Antioch all the time. And everyone assumes that they're talking about Antioch on the Mediterranean coast. But I don't think that's true. I think they were all going backwards and forwards to Antioch Edessa, because we have the same story from Josephus Flavius. This is about the Council of Jerusalem, where they were going to convert the people of, or the kings of Antioch. We have the same story from Josephus Flavius, except he says they're going to add Diabene. We have the same story in Acts, in Acts of the Apostles, where the disciples are going backwards and forwards to see Saul in Antioch, all about converting the people and circumcision and all of this sort of business. And we have the same story from the doctrine of Addai, with the apostles going backwards and forwards, this time to Edessa in that story. So yeah, this same story is repeated several times. And I think on each occasion that they're actually talking about Edessa. And that is the nativity story, because that's why the three magi came to this birth, because this Edessan monarchy had come out of Parthia, and that's why the Persian magi were there. And they're all sitting there wearing their Phrygian caps.
Those are Phrygian caps.
Yeah, which is, I don't know if people know about this. The cap is supposed to be the cap of freedom, but it is central to this story, and it needs following up a little bit more. I've gone through it in very brief detail, but the reason for everyone, because it was very common in Edessa, why everyone was wearing the Phrygian cap, because we still get it today. This is the Marianne, and obviously the Marianne is a play on words with Mary Magdalene.
Right.
This is from France. The Marianne is the symbol of France.
Is that a Norman era coin?
No, this is a modern one.
Yeah, that's what I meant. It's not 2,000 years ago.
No, this is French Republic. So this is probably 20th century, probably.
Okay.
Because in France they still have it. So this is the Marianne in France, and they're all wearing the Phrygian cap, as the Marianne does in France. She always wears the Phrygian cap. And so do the Smurfs as well.
Have you seen research? This is just a tangent, but there's some pretty good research that the Frisians of Europe, who preserved the Oralin Dutch manuscript, are actually, their origin is Phrygia in Turkey, and that I forgot, some type of Israelite connection. I can't remember the deal. It's like, there's a statement in there that's very similar to the Scottish Declaration of Arbroath. You familiar with that?
Arbroath, yes.
Where it talks about where they came from, the Scythians,
yes,
and that they also claimed an Israelite descent. The whole Israelite descent deal is very interesting for the Parthians as well, because the Parthians were the enemies of the Romans, but Parthian history shows that the Parthians themselves came from the north after their freedom from Assyria. And we know in the biblical material, in Sargon II was the second one, but under Sennacherib, Ashurbanipal, Sargon II, we know that 10 different groups in the Israelite occupied areas from Argob and Bashan, all of northern, all of part of Lebanon, Syria, all the way down into Transjordan. They were all deported and put on the frontiers of the Assyrian domains, but Assyria didn't keep them there that long. Most of those cultures ended up escaping and try. It's a huge study. I know you're familiar with it. It's a huge study. A lot of authors have published many books about the the Israelite migrations, getting away from that the Near East and populating everywhere else in the world. But the Parthians are a part of that group. The Parthians are literally a part of the exiles of Assyria.
Yes, they took over Persia. So Persia was Persia, and then it was taken over by Alexander the Great and became Greek circa 300 odd BC. And then slowly Greek influence waned there, and the Parthians took over in about the 1st century BC, and then it became Parthian. And as you say, the Parthians came out of northeast sort of Iran, that sort of region, and took over the region. But I was going to have a quick look at another reason why this should be an AD 60s story, and that is who is Saul? Because Saul wrote most of the New Testament, and yet Saul is missing from the historical record. So it would be very nice, along with all of these other characters, if we could identify Saul in the historical record. And I think I did this back in 97 in my Jesus Last of the Pharaohs. So this was a long time ago. Because when I started reading this story, it was pretty obvious to me that there were two characters that looked rather similar, exactly the same, in fact. And so these two characters, one is Saul, of course. So they were both Jews. They were both raised in Jerusalem. They both had Roman citizenship, which was a little bit unusual. They were both educated as Pharisees. They both became rabbis. They both didn't like long hair, which is unusual. So this was not a Judaic tradition. This is more Roman. So we're talking about a Romophile here. So yeah, both were working with Rome eventually. Both had a vision of a man, so they both had a flash of inspiration. They both traveled widely in Europe and came back to Jerusalem. They were both stoned and attacked by their opponents.
So who? Okay, Paul is one. Who's the other? Saul is one.
We'll come on to that. But more importantly,
okay,
both were on the same prison ship that sailed from Judea to Rome in AD 62. The prison ship that was wrecked on Malta. So they were both in a shipwreck. They were shipwrecked on
Castor
Malta.
And Pollux?
Yeah, it was Castor and Pollux, yeah. So ships in those days had names the same as they do today. Right, so the ship was called Castor and Pollux. So they both ended up on Malta, and they both went the next season. They went to Naples in order to have an audience with Nero, Emperor Nero. Now, how many people from Judea on a prison ship, actually prisoners, would have been going to see Nero in AD 62?
Yeah, if I was to put all these data points together side by side, and these are two different historical figures, these are two different narratives, two different bodies of information that provide basically the same deal. I'm gonna have to agree that mathematically improbable for them to be different people.
And they both had the same publisher as well, called Epaphroditus.
Yeah, it's improbable they're different people. It's the same individual. You got my curiosity. Now I want to know who it is.
Yeah, it's Josephus Flavius.
Okay, all right. I can buy that. I can buy that. He's the most prolific writer of the first century. No one in the first century put out as much material as he did.
Both prolific writers, as you say. Now, the difficulty with this, of course, is the first thing that people point out is that Josephus Flavius was much later. He was born in AD 37. Now, the immediate answer to that is, well, nobody knows when Saul was born, because it's not mentioned. It's just assumed he was born in AD 10, but there is no evidence of that whatsoever.
Right.
And it does work, because the other thing is people will say, oh, it doesn't work, because he goes on these evangelical tours of Greece and Turkey. It does work. So if he was born in AD 37, he would have had his bar mitzvah in the early AD 50s. And of course, once you've had your bar mitzvah, you are a man. Okay, you're still very young. He was only 14. But he was still a man. And of course, who do you send on evangelical tours? If you're in Europe, as we are over here, and you get a knock on the door from the Jehovah's Witnesses, what do you get? Do you get two old guys there, or two middle-aged guys, or do you get two youths? Well, of course, what they do is they send out the youth, because the youth don't have a family, they don't have jobs, etc. They have freedom to go and travel, and so they send out on these evangelical tours the young of the Latter-day Saints. Well, this is exactly what they were doing in Judea for the Nazarene sect of Jesus and James. They were sending out the young lads, and it was Saul and Barnabas going on this evangelical tour. Now, Barnabas was the older. We know that, it says so in Acts of the Apostles. And Saul, in this new form as Josephus Flavius, would have been 14 or 15 years old, which is perfectly acceptable. He was a man. He was going out across, Europe and getting stoned all the time because nobody would listen to his Nazarene nonsense. And so, yes, this becomes explanatory, which is why I like this story. I wrote about this back in 97, because it explains lots of things that are inexplicable. For instance, Saul was busy persecuting and jailing the Nazarene Church of Jesus and James, as it says in Acts of the Apostles. It says Saul made havoc on the church, entering every house and committing them to prison. Acts 8:3. I persecuted them unto death, binding and delivering men and women to prisons. Acts 22:4. Now, Saul was supposed to be a tent maker. How was a tent maker supposed to be arresting people, killing them, and putting them in prison?
Right.
It makes no sense.
So Saul was a fake identity covering up the original Josephus.
Well, if he was Josephus, we know exactly how he was doing this, because Josephus became the army commander in command of Galilee. And he spent all of the late AD 60s chasing a guy called Jesus of Gamala Saphias, around Galilee, and arresting them and committing them to prison, and on certain occasions killing them.
And so this would have been the origin for stories that were later embellished and ended up in the possession of the church and were published as Fox's Book of Martyrs.
But they couldn't mention who this person was, because nobody in the world would want their primary author of the Gospels to be Josephus Flavius.
Yes.
Because if people don't know Josephus that well, he was the most slippery, slimy, traitorous person ever invented.
Well, yeah, he was Jewish, and the Romans were about to hand the Jews their ass, and he turned coat and started working for the Romans.
Sides.
Yeah, he changed sides. That's the traitor's the worst.
Yeah, but he's also a real egotist. He's a real horrible person. When he's in the dungeon, he's surrounded by Romans, and they're hiding in the dungeons when he was Judean, and they decide that they should have to commit suicide. It's the only way out, is committing suicide. So Josephus has this trick by which he is choosing who is to die next, and therefore he is left as the last man standing.
Yeah.
And doesn't have to commit suicide. And he's laughing at his compatriots at their stupidity, that he is the last man standing.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of character that Josephus was. And of course, nobody would want him attached to the gospel story whatsoever.
Right.
But it explains all of these oddities within the gospel story. I mean, for instance, when Saul is in prison, because Josephus was imprisoned as well, when Saul was imprisoned for teachings that were contradictory to Judaism, so he got thrown into jail. He was visited by, and this guy is supposed to be a tent maker, of course. He was visited by Governor Festus, Governor Felix, King Agrippa II, and then sent to Emperor Nero to hear his charges, in the court case against him. You don't do that to a tent maker.
No, you don't.
You don't get Felix coming, who's Governor Felix, the governor of Judea, coming to a tent maker and asking for bribes from Saul, who was in prison.
Right.
This comes from Acts 24:26, if people want to look it up.
Asking for bribes, so they knew that they had imprisoned a man of wealth.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Now,
so
that doesn't suit Saul at all, but of course it suits Josephus wonderfully, because he was actually very important. He was the first out of the 20th of the Judean priests or something. And of course, when he was army commander in charge of Galilee, he was gaining money hand over fist, because they used to use hostages as a way of earning money. They used to take hostages, and of course, Josephus managed to capture Jesus, because he was chasing this guy called Jesus all over Galilee, Jesus of Gamala Sapphires, and he was ransomed by King Agrippa II. And of course, Josephus would have his hands in that pot all the time. So yes, he was a rich guy, was Josephus.
Wow. So I wonder if the story of Agrippina skating on the ice, falling through the ice and being decapitated has any historical value at all. Do you think it's a pseudepigraphical text, but I wonder if there's any actual history here.
Well, I think there is often there is a lot of history. It's just, as I say, it's the same story, but different, because they've slightly just distorted what it actually says. And a classic one is why was Saul a tent maker? We now know he was rich, he was aristocratic, he was probably princely, he was an ambassador of Edessa. We've seen all of that. So why do they call him a tent maker? Well, the reason is that Queen Helena of Edessa, the Queen of Edessa, and Saul would have been her ambassador. She had the largest Sukkot in the whole of Judea. She was a queen, so she had the largest Sukkot. The Sukkot is
the Sukkot, that is Jewish for tent.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, you're right.
This is the festival of Sukkot. It's the festival of tabernacles, when the Jews make a ritual tabernacle, and they live in this tabernacle for 2 nights or something over one weekend. And they still do it today. They'll make their tabernacles today, and they'll stay in this tent, basically, in commemoration of the Exodus, of course, when they built the tabernacle during the Exodus. Now, Queen Helena of Edessa had the largest Sukkot in the whole of Judea. Now, who would have made that Sukkot? It's quite obvious it would have been Saul Josephus. That's why he was known as a tent maker. That comes from Acts 18:3, of course, if anyone wants to look it up. So again, the story is correct, but of course they've just translated it in a rather literal sense, that he's some poor artisan making tents.
Okay, so I'm on board so far. I like seeing how original interpretation totally changes what we have received now. So let's assume, arguendo, that you're absolutely correct, and this Flavian, this Josephus here, Josephus or Josephus, how you pronounce his name. Let's say he is Paul, and he is the origin of the Pauline material. So there's nothing in the Pauline material. It's really interesting because there is. I've read War of the Jews. I've read Antiquities of the Jews. I've read Against Appian, and it took me about 3 months to get through those 3 books.
Yeah,
they're huge.
They're pretty big.
They're huge. So there's no miracles in Josephus
No.
in relation to the gospel story and Jesus. And Paul's writings don't have a virgin birth, walking on water, curing the blind, feeding 5,000, raising the dead, Lazarus. Paul's writings don't have any miracles. Josephus's don't either. So there is definitely a bridge here. So my question still remains. You did answer for the walking on water could be ice, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, technically you're not lying if you walk on, if a pond is covered frozen, if a pond is frozen and you walk across it, you're not lying to anybody if you say that you walked on water, right?
Yeah.
So it's little things like this is what you were saying. We can go through the whole gospel narrative, isolate every single miracle and all that. Or are you also of the opinion that Jesus, King of Edessa, healed a blind man or raised a dead? Or these metaphors, allegory?
No, every king and every emperor, because even Vespasian had the same problem. Every king and emperor had to have an oracle on their side. And of course, Vespasian did exactly the same. So Vespasian didn't have an oracle because he was only a bit of a commoner. So he did exactly the same as Jesus. He spat in somebody's eye to cure their eyesight, because that's what you had to do in order to show that you had favor with the gods.
Worshipped like as gods.
Yeah, of course.
Caesar worship was very real.
Yeah. And of course, the miracles in the Bible are just gloss put on this, historical story. This is why I call it the Jewish war with fairy dust put upon it, to make it more spiritual. The classic one is the feeding the 5,000. Now, the feeding the 5,000 was either done by Jesus or it was done by the Egyptian false prophet. They both did it. So it's quite obvious that the Egyptian false prophet was the biblical Jesus. But what is that story? It's 5,000 men out in the wilderness somewhere who were grouped in 50s and 100s. And then they have 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and there's 12 baskets left over at the end of it. Well, the 2 fishes is Pisces, of course. So this is an instruction. Bread in the Gospels is knowledge. It's often used as a metaphor for knowledge. So it's knowledge of the age of Pisces. And this was the age of Pisces. From AD 10, Jesus was the fisher king, the first king of Pisces, exactly as we find in Arthurian legend. Because the great month of Aries turned into the great month of Pisces in AD 10. So that's what they're talking about with the 2 fish. And the 12 baskets left over is the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 houses of the zodiac. So why was Jesus giving this story, this briefing to 5,000 people in the wilderness? Well, of course, in my story, he was the leader of the Jewish revolt. We'll come on to this because it was the Edessan monarchy who started the Jewish revolt, and we'll have a look at why that's so. But if that is true, then Jesus needed his own legion, and of course, a legion is 5,000 men.
Right.
And they were grouped in 50s and 100s. You have a centurion because your soldiers are grouped in hundreds.
Right.
And then immediately after this meeting in the wilderness with 5,000, Jesus says, leave everything behind and take up your cross and follow me. Now, that would make no sense whatsoever in that timeline because Jesus had not yet been crucified. So the cross would be meaningless before the crucifixion. It would have no relevance to the story whatsoever.
Yeah, so unless you were referring to Spartacus, the cross would be meaningless.
Well, no, unless you had a legion, because all of the legionnaires carried a cross. It was called a furca, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And upon your cross, you would put all of your equipment. So you can put your armor, because a cross looks like a person. You can actually put all of your armor on the cross and all of your other materials you need, your bedding, your pickaxe, everything you need goes on this cross. And you pick up your cross and you follow the commander. It was a common command to a legion. Pick up your cross and follow me. So that's what it was talking about. And again, we come back to this. It's the same story, but different, just being reinterpreted. And this, I think, is why we have this story, because the story was of the Jewish revolt, because it was the Edessan monarchy who started the Jewish revolt. And I've probably got some.
So I want to offer something chronological to you. So you've got all this going on 40 years later, and I'm on board with that. But where I see something additional unfolding is that you seem to be of the opinion that within AD 73 AD, 74 AD, 75, 76, 77, these things were now starting to be written down and all that. And with the Pauline material and the Josephus material, I agree. But I don't see any historical evidence, and I've gone through a whole bunch of material, and I've published it too. I don't see nothing appearing of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that story that has really glossed over all these things that you so easily explain and has created this mythological, this messianic Jesus scenario. None of these documents appear until after Jerusalem is destroyed a second time in the Bar Kokhba rebellion, AD 135.
Yeah, that's possible. I've seen lots of different estimates on that. Everyone is in agreement that the gospel story didn't arrive till at least after AD 70.
So I agree.
Some historians will say after AD 70, and some, like you, will say after during the second century. But yes, they are later. The giveaway that this is material that is earlier is a lot of Luke and a lot of Acts comes straight out of Josephus Flavius.
Yes, Acts is very interesting. Did you know that the book of Acts is not mentioned in any other Paul's writings?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
he never mentions the book of Acts. It's always bothered me because he's the main character in it.
Yeah, he's the main character in it. There are lots of oddities like that. I mean, the other oddity, which is startling, of course, if you look at the epistles. So these are the letters that were written before the Jewish revolt, from the AD 50s to the AD 60s.
Yeah.
They don't mention the crucifixion.
Yeah.
So nowhere within the epistles do we get the full crucifixion story. You know, the whole story of the trial and the washing the hands, the cross being carried, the scourging, the water, the vinegar, all of those details, the women at the cross and all the rest of it. None of those details are in the epistles.
I agree. In Paul's epistles, they promote a Jesus of the Logos, very similar to Philo Judaeus. Philo Judaeus also talked about the Christos and the Logos and all that. And it's like, wow, man, it's almost as if that Paul didn't even know a personal Jesus. He didn't even know.
That's the point. If Jesus had been crucified in AD 30, then Paul would have been lamenting that story.
Yes, he would have known the story. Yeah,
he would have known the story. That would have been the central element of his teachings when he was going across Greece and Turkey. He would have been lamenting that story. Our poor Savior, he was killed. The Romans did this. You know, the Jews did that. That would have been central to his letters in the epistles. And of course, it's not. And the reason it's not is because Jesus was not crucified until AD 70. And of course, we have the crucifixion story from Josephus.
And it's a totally different scenario.
No, it's the same. It's exactly the same.
No, what I mean is the gospel crucifixion has him being resurrected 3 days later, massive earthquake, the sun darkens, he comes out the tomb.
We've got an embellishment, but it's exactly the same in its general broad brush stroke of it. And again, for people who have not heard this story, Josephus Flavius, who is Saul, as we've looked at earlier, he was now working for the Romans. So he changed side. He's now working for the Romans, and he was the chief propaganda minister to Emperor Vespasian during the Jewish revolt, trying to get the Jews to surrender to Rome.
Right.
So after Jerusalem has fallen, Everyone's been taken captive. Josephus, Saul Josephus, as I call him, was down in Tekoa, which is down to the south of Jerusalem. There's a big fortress there. He comes back from Tekoa, and as he comes up the Kidron Valley, he sees the three leaders of the Jewish revolt, who would have been the three Edessan princes, of course, being crucified. And so he thinks this is a very stupid idea. He goes to the governor, who is actually Titus at the time, and says, look, don't do this. Let's take them down early. So the three leaders are taken down from the cross early. Two of them die, and one of them survives.
Got you. I got you. Again, I'm on board with this interpretation.
Familiar story?
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is the crucifixion story, but this happened in AD 70, and it happened to the Edessan monarchy, who were the leaders of the Jewish revolt.
Yeah. Oh, Ralph, I have never, in 6 years of Archaix podcast, I have never told a guest I love them, but I love you, man.
Yes. It's interesting, isn't it? Because all of this is in plain sight. This is not new information. This information has been out there for hundreds of years, ever since the works of Josephus has been, translated by Whiston and so on. Everyone has seen it. And I think lots of people have seen what I've seen, but they've closed their eyes to it because it's too troubling. If you're a Christian, it undermines a lot of what you think you know about Christianity. It's the same story, but it's not the Jesus you understood.
It brings it down from the divine to the mundane.
Absolutely.
And it opens up another door. There's two things I want to, because you're so full of information. There's actually three things I want to interject with before we continue. One of them is that the whole Edessa narrative now makes sense of what we find in Paul. Paul's writings are very, very specific. These writings are only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And when he said, and then he identifies who they are over and over in the headings to his letters to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and then he names the 7 cities of Turkey. Did you ever notice that in Paul in the New Testament? He names Palmyra, Thessalonica, Sardis. He just goes through them in the 7 churches, except for the one in Athens. The seven churches are in Turkey, right there, close to Edessa. So I found that interesting too. You would think that if this man was really writing to the descendants of Jews and not the descendants of Israelites, he would be naming cities in Jerusalem and elsewhere. But he's naming all the Christian strongholds of Cappadocia, Turkey, and Asia Minor. Those are all ancient Macedonian establishments. Those are Macedonian cities. They were Ionian cities. A lot of crossover between the Thessalonica, which is north of Macedon, and then Macedon itself. It's just crazy to see this crossover here linked so geographically so close to Edessa. Another thing I wanted to say was, we're real big in the Christian mysteries of talking about the chief cornerstone, the head of the corner, the stone uncut by human hands. And in your book, one of your books I was going through, I was like, no way. Jesus, I even wrote it down for you, man, because he was called the chief tecton. He wasn't even called a carpenter. It's a mistranslation.
Yes.
Can you tell my community exactly what this really meant?
Yeah, tecton means architect in Greek. So he was the chief architect. Architect means chief tecton, chief architect.
And what were architects building? What was the main building material throughout history?
Well, they work in stone, of course, which is why we have these building metaphors. But of course, the chief architect is a Freemason. So Jesus was a Freemason. He was the Grand Master of the Judean Lodge.
I'm going to have to agree with that, only from the context of Jesus was the king of Edessa.
Well, no, also because of the raising of Lazarus. The raising of Lazarus,
a Masonic ritual.
It's a 3rd degree raising.
So it's one of the ancient rites.
Well, it's exactly the same as the third degree I went through, because I was a master mason.
Yeah,
Haven't
yeah. The
haven't
first
been
three
to
degrees are the ancient accepted rites, right?
yeah
Yeah.
yeah from Blue Lodge, and so the raising of Lazarus is, if anyone knows that story from the Gospels, Lazarus died and was put in a tomb for 3 days, came out on the fourth day, and he was raised out of the tomb by Jesus, of course. Now, and he came out of the tomb hoodwinked, which means he had a cover over his head. Now, that's exactly what you do during the third degree of Freemasonry. You are actually imitating Hiram Abiff from the building of the Temple of Solomon, and you die, you're put in a grave. And within Masonry, it's not so difficult nowadays. You're only in the grave, as it were, for half an hour, and then you are raised out of the grave by the lion grip in exactly the same way as Lazarus was. Now, the only difference, of course, is it looks like this first century initiation was much more challenging than the modern
You
Freemasonry.
said lion grip. Are you talking about the the lion's paw handshake?
Yes, that's the lion's. That's where the lion grip comes from. Is from
Okay.
the third degree. So today you go into your symbolic grave for 30 minutes or so, but it looks like in the first century you were actually put into a tomb for 3 days, which is a familiar sort of amount of time. And
Damn, that right there answers for it. I mean,
but
I cannot argue that that's an awesome connection. That
yeah,
we have literally accepted the gospels, which were predicated on ritual. These are
yes,
rituals
oh
and
yes, yes.
misunderstood historical events.
And you would be stuck in that grave in the total darkness for 3 days, unable to get out yourself. So you would be totally dependent on your brethren coming to your rescue after the third day. Now that is that's a real test of your commitment to this society, that you're going to be dependent on these people coming to your aid. And I think that's what this ceremony was all about.
I'm making all kinds of connections, man. Listen. As you're speaking in my mind, because I'm a dot connector, I'm automatically seeing the Normans all hyped up in the First Crusade to get back to Edessa. Because if you remember the Crusade narratives, the Knights Hospitallers were first, then the Templars came out. Then the Templars came out and established the trade routes from Edessa all the way back to Europe. And there was this cross, and then from Edessa we launched other crusades going in Antioch into well, like you said, it could be the Edessian Antioch, but we launched the other crusades for Jerusalem. Edessa was like a major holding area for Crusader armies. But I'm seeing connections here because these are Masonic rituals that have become historicized.
Yes.
And yet the whole history of Europe and the Crusades was about going back to those roots where all these stories were. And it was with, I mean, I have Albert Mackey's full set of encyclopedias on Freemasonry. I have Albert Pike. I've gone through this material out of curiosity, flipping through it, and I can't believe how Freemasonry is literally today what we have in these 32 degrees that we know is it's a lot of stuff that was in the Knights Hospitallers, the Knights Templars, later on the Jolly Roger period when the Templars were outlawed. But most people don't even know that when the Templars were outlawed, that's where we got our pirate forms with the skull and crossbones and the Jolly Roger, because the Templars couldn't fly a Templar deal no more. Every fleet out there was looking for them, especially the black nobility, all the nobility that were attached to the Pope. So they started flying the Jolly Roger, and in our Hollywood version of pirates with the skull and crossbones, white and black flag, well, actually that was actually the outlawed Knights Templars, and how they took their lodges to the seas.
Yeah, that's the symbol, of course, in the third degree tracing board. The third degree tracing board is a sarcophagus, a coffin, with a skull and crossbones on it.
Look, Ralph, don't reveal too many secrets here, man. I still got a lot of years left to live, man. I'm not trying to piss those people off.
Yeah, but this is the whole story of the Knights Templar, as you were saying, that the people on the First Crusade, so we're talking about Count Baldwin and his mates who organized the First Crusade, must have known something about Edessa. And we know, today we don't know much about Edessa, but we know that people in those days did know about Edessa because King Alfred the Great, who's the first king of England, as it were, when he was fighting the Saxons coming into Britain, he took time out to send the Bishop of Salisbury to Edessa and to India, to the Edessan Church in India. We were talking about this before, the Edessan Church in India. This is back in the 10th century, because they knew that Edessa was central to this story. So in days gone by, people would have known that Edessa was central to this story. Because the Edessan Church in India, in Malabar, say that Saint Thomas, who is the brother of Jesus, his name is Judas Thomas Didymus Lebbaeus Thaddeus.
Didymus, he's the twin.
He's the twin, and he was the twin of Jesus. But it says that Judas Thomas came from Edessa. Now, if the brother of Jesus comes from Edessa, where does Jesus come from? So all roads lead to Edessa. So the Crusaders would have known this, and this is why they went to Edessa initially. And this is why the Knights Templar would have been set up, because what are the Knights Templar about? They are a secret society that are wanting to hold biblical style secrets. Where would you find those secrets? You would find them in Edessa. So you would be looking for texts, chronologies, chronicles, artifacts, genealogies, all of this information that might still be left in Edessa. They went there in 1098, so 1,000 years after these events happened. All of that information might still have been in Edessa. And once you found that information, what do you do with it? Because it's heretical. Right. You have to hold it within a secret society. It's the only way to do it. Otherwise, you're going to be strung up. You're going to be burnt at the stake or whatever. And that's why the Knights Templar were formed. And so they held all of that information all the way up until 1307, when the Knights Templar were destroyed on Friday the 13th, which is why Friday the 13th is still unlucky for some.
Yeah.
So
Jacques, that was Jacques de Molay.
And he was slow roasted, so that's what they were trying to stop. But this was information that was dangerous for the Catholic Church, and of course it was the Catholic Church who tried and successfully destroyed the Templars, because they didn't want this information to get out. Now, what happened to that information, we don't really know. I rather think a lot of this information was lost, because when I've been writing this book, because my Edessa book pretty much is all the secrets that the Templars would have had.
Well, I want to add. Listen, when the Templars started flying the Jolly Roger, when they took to piracy, there is a story that's really interesting about 1314 called you're familiar with the Battle of Bannockburn between England and Scotland? There is a story that a cavalry came to the defense of Robert the Bruce at Bannockburn, and all the cavalries were accounted for. There was no help coming. Some say that it was a Templar fleet that landed, and this is where the Scottish Rite would have come from. The Templars changing their name. You're probably familiar with that history book. But what I really wanted to draw your attention to was this: when the Templars were outlawed in 1307, 1314, in that period there, when this had happened, this is the exact time period when something very unusual happened in the world of mariners. all of a sudden we had the publication or the discovery of the Zeno map 1380, the Bosch map, the Piri-Reis map, and there's like 7 other maps. And these maps are copies of copies that are ancient, that go back to even showing Antarctica with all its mountains and valleys and coastlines in the exact places where they are under 2 miles of ice pack today. So it was when the Templar fleets were took, when the Templars were took to the fleets. That's the exact time in history where we have the discovery of all these amazing maps that like Charles Hapgood's Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. Yeah, he's just one book. There's several authors that have put these together, but maps, very important maps, suddenly appeared in the public sector that had been hidden. Nobody had even heard of these maps, known about these maps, and all of a sudden now they're out there. And then this was what started major schemes to go basically find a new way to India. You know the story from there. Marco Polo and Christopher Colon, who was a Genoan Jew. We know him as Christopher Columbus. But yeah, it's so yeah, we do have some historical verification from that from the side of Mariner research, because it's the exact same time when they were outlawed that all these maps started appearing.
And this would be the information that they had, of course. If you can just let that screen share come up, because I think you have to press, a button your side. Yeah, this might seem off topic, but this is the sort of information that these people would have had, because I don't think people probably realize. Well, firstly, the Edessan monarchy were Jews. I mean, we should point that out. So there is another link here. They were Nazarene Jews, because Queen Helena of Edessa underwent 7 years of initiation to become a Nazarene. And of course, Jesus was also a Nazarene. So we have another link there. But this, we're looking at a zodiac here. This zodiac was owned by Jesus of Gamala Saphias. We've talked about him before. Jesus of Gamala is the person who married Mary Magdalene, according to the Talmud. So we can go through that in a minute.
Oh, that's right. The Talmud does have a different version of Jesus.
It does, yes.
You're right.
So, so this is a zodiac. So the primary symbol of Nazarene Judaism was the zodiac. And this zodiac is on the Sea of Galilee, just below Tiberias. Now, if you look at classical history, they don't link it with Jesus of Gamala, but Josephus Flavius describes this zodiac just south of Tiberias, which is
it's this one right here. The one that Josephus
I've been to see it. This is my photo.
Okay.
I mean, it's open to the public. You can go and see it. And it's a lovely it's quite big. It's like 4 meters across. This is big.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it because I've done a deep dive on zodiacs, trying to find any evidence that they were Greek, when everything I can find is Roman. But this one, some scholars date it to the 3rd century and 4th century, but I can agree that it could be 1st century. I can agree that.
Well, we've got a couple of reasons for thinking that, because this is a processional zodiac. It goes round the wrong way. Yeah, it goes anti-clockwise. Or rather, it goes clockwise round this way. So this is Aries, this is Pisces, and the head of Helios, the sun, is pointing at the conjunction between Aries and Pisces. And of course, that is in procession. That dates this to AD 10. That is why Jesus was born as a Lamb of God, but became a fisher of men. It was the great month of Aries turning into the great month of Pisces. So that is pointing at 1st century. And then the other thing is that we have this story from Josephus Flavius, that Josephus himself, as army commander of Galilee, was sent to destroy this zodiac. He was sent to destroy the images, the heretical images of animals in the palace that was 4 furlongs south of Tiberias. And of course, if you go 4 furlongs south of Tiberias, you find these heretical images of animals. So Josephus Flavius was sent to destroy this zodiac, which he says belonged to Jesus of Gamala Saphias. And of course, Jesus of Gamala Saphias was the leader of 600 rebel fishermen. Who was the leader of rebel fishermen in the
Oh, he's
first
the Fisher
century?
King. He's the Fisher King then.
Yeah, we're back to
Yeah.
the Fisher Kings.
There you go.
But of course, this is hugely heretical. It's in a synagogue. We know that because all of the symbolism above this, in the next register above, is all from the Temple of Jerusalem. It's all in Aramaic, of course, but it's got Helios in the center, the Greek sun god. So it's highly heretical. But look at Helios, and look what he's got in his left hand. He's holding a blue marble earth in his gravitational grasp. So yes, these were navigators. These people understood the solar system and the cosmos. Let's have a better look at that, because this is a spherical earth. Look at it. It has light colors on the left, dark colors on the right, which would only happen if this was a sphere, not a circle. And look, it's got lines of latitude and longitude on it, which are curved. This would only happen if he was holding a sphere, not a circular plate. So here is Helios holding the Earth in his gravitational grasp. So they understood the heliocentric model of the solar system. So yes, these are people who would be able to navigate by lines of latitude and longitude. There were great secrets held within this fraternity, not just what we know from the biblical stories.
Yeah. Even though I've read on this, I got a whole file on this zodiac here, and and most scholars date it to the 3rd century AD.
Yep.
But I have no problem dating it to the 1st century AD after finding the coins of King Antoninus.
Yes.
Have you seen the zodiac coins?
With the zodiac on them.
They're dated to about 140 AD. But he minted one coin for each sign of the zodiac, and then a 13th coin that had the entire zodiac on it.
Okay. Yes. Yeah,
those coins. I showed them on. I posted them on X and in the community on YouTube for everybody to see, because they are the oldest. They are the oldest representations that are known to scholarship in art of the zodiac of Aries through Pisces. It's dated to the 2nd century AD. Some say it might be that some of the coins were dated in the 1st century. So this being the 1st century, I wouldn't have a problem with it. It's almost all Latin Jewish.
We do have the Dendera zodiac, of course. That's got all the same symbols on it, and that's 3rd century BC. So that's even older.
But that's Roman era. That's
Egyptian. Yeah,
it's still Roman
Ptolemaic
era under the Ptolemies.
This is another zodiac, just to show that these are very common. There have been 6 or 7 of these found in Judea. They're all very early zodiacs. They're all Jewish zodiacs.
Hey, look, I'm building a theory. I'm building a theory right now, and I've got some very compelling evidence. I'm building a theory. There was 200,000 Jews living outside of Alexandria, one of the largest Jewish communities in the entire world for over 800 years, northern Egypt, and it's starting to look like the Aries through Pisces zodiac is a Jewish invention based off the older world's lunar zodiacs, which had different signs.
Well, I think these, we know from Egypt that they were using the same symbolism, but they were following the processional zodiac, and they would have known that when you come to a conjunction between great months, so the great month of Pisces to the great month of the great month of Aries to the great month of Pisces, then traumatic events are supposed to happen. And that's why whoever becomes king at the turn of the turn of the great month, something special, momentous is going to happen at that time. And of course it did, and it was embodied by this new Fisher King, the Jesus King, and the Jewish revolt, which embedded this into history, because we have this great revolt against Rome. And
this whole narrative that you're talking about here with Jesus, King of Edessa, this opens up so many possibilities. I'm gonna be frank. I have never given a damn about the pseudepigraphical text talking about Joseph of Arimathea. I'm not a real fan of like E. Raymond Cap's material, and he shows a lot of historical documents showing that Jesus escaped into early Britain. But you know what's really crazy? This changes everything, because I'm no longer looking. I mean, you're verifying what I already believe. The Jesus Son of God narrative is not true. The divinity deal is not true. These are human events. You just described it better than me. I'm just good with chronological material and textual material, and being able to show when those texts were released and when they existed and when they didn't, and being able to identify interpolations. So you're showing an actual historical Jesus, but it's very different than the one that modern Christianity has been brainwashed to believe. And yet it has historical provenance. So now I can actually go back through a lot of this material and try to figure out why in the hell were the Romans so dead hard fixated on trying to eliminate Druidism? What was it about Druidism that they just trying to erase it? Why were the Caesars so hell bent on taking Britain? We have these old documents that Jesus escaped into Britain. And then Paul even visited, whoever Paul is, visited Britain. And the early Irish and early English records from the monks are pretty persuasive. But I've always dismissed them because I didn't believe when Jesus in front of 500 witnesses flew up into heaven, he's gone. There's no way Jesus got on his ship and went to Britain. The narrative says that he flew up into heaven. He was gone. So this kind of opens up a whole nother can of worms. I'm gonna have to talk to Michael Desarion about some of this stuff because it's kind of blowing my mind.
Yes, well, I think he did actually go to Britain, so there is a link there, because the leaders,
Raymond Cap says the same thing.
Yeah, the leaders of the Jewish revolt, who were the Edessan monarchy, were captured after the fall of Jerusalem, and they were taken to Rome in chains, and I think they were eventually sent on to Britannia. So if you just allow that screen share to come up.
Yeah, because I can't remember her name. What was her name? The Queen of Britain who she fought the legions.
Yeah, Boudica. So
Boudica, that's right.
Just for context, of people who don't know, the Druids were destroyed in the early AD 60s, and that was a problem for Rome because they got this wrong. They caused an uprising in Britannia, which ended up destroying 6 Roman cities in Britannia. So I think someone decided that they got this wrong when they destroyed the Druids.
Isn't that weird? It's weird because Roman policy inside the perimeters of the Roman Empire was to let you do your religion. You do you. As long as you render, unto Caesar.
Yes, but they wouldn't honor the emperor as their primary deity or primary king. So, like the Jews, the Jews would not honor the emperor as being divine in any fashion. Neither were the Druids, and so they were highly messianic, rebellious, and so Rome decided to get rid of the Druids, and they did. But it caused a huge, great uprising, which destroyed most of Britannia. Now, when it came to the Jews, who were doing exactly the same as the Druids, and messianic Jews who were trying to overturn Rome, and so they went sort of more softly. So instead of destroying all of these people, they came to a compromise. And the compromise was that the leaders of the revolt were taken, and they were taken as prisoners to Rome. And then later, I think they were taken as prisoners to Britannia, because what they wanted was somewhere as far from their power base as possible. And if you look at a map of Rome and look at Judea and say, where is as far as you can possibly get from Judea, and you arrive at Chester in Britannia, which is across the other side of the empire. And I think they were sent to a prison fortress. And this is that prison fortress here. And I think this was a vast Guantanamo Bay, because it was Emperor Vespasian who was the victor in the Jewish revolt, and it was Emperor Vespasian who built this fortress over in Chester in Western Britannia. And this fortress is very strange because it was in the middle of nowhere. It was not strategic, on the edge of the empire, and it contained lots of extra elements which are not shown on any other fortress. So it had extra accommodation block. It had this exercise area in the middle, and it had this temple. You didn't get temples in fortresses, and this is a very strange temple because this is unique to the whole of the Roman Empire, and this was the biggest fortress in the Roman Empire, and it had a separate bathhouse. You can see the bathhouse just to the south here of the temple complex.
This reminds me of the quarantine of King Caradoc in Rome.
Same thing, yes, very much so, because yeah, this is what Rome liked to do normally. They liked to take in the barbarians and try to civilize them. But that was not possible in the case of the Edessan monarchy who had started the Jewish revolt. So I think they were placed here, just to keep them away from, didn't want to kill them because that would cause problems. Remember that the best friend of King Jesus, because his name was King Jesus, the Edessan king was called King Jesus Manu. We've not been through that. The best friend of King Jesus was Berenike, who was the de facto wife of Emperor Vespasian's son Titus. So you can see there were family links to these people as well. So it was probably not the best idea just to sort of murder them.
Right.
And so I think they were sent into this vast Guantanamo Bay, first century Guantanamo Bay, to keep them away from their power base.
Yeah, it's a lot of luxury. They're basically luxury prisons.
Absolutely.
They had them in Rome. They had them in Rome, and if they didn't work, they had one other thing they could do. They could march you down to triumph.
Yes, absolutely. And they built this temple, and now this temple is unique in the Roman Empire. It's a vesica piscis. It's this vesica piscis shape, and it's got the 12 compartments of a zodiac, of course. So this is a temple of the zodiac, and the vesica piscis is made in this fashion here. 2 circles together, and you get the vesica piscis in the middle. It's actually an image of the celestial sphere and not the equinox, the ecliptic sphere. Where these 2 spheres meet, you get this shape in the sky, which is the vesica piscis. So it's all to do with the zodiac. This was a temple of the zodiac with 12 nice compartments for each sign of the zodiac. Now, people might recognize this shape. Who was strongly linked to this vesica piscis shape? Well, it was, of course, the biblical Jesus, who's often shown in the same shape. And I think this was a temple that was built by these prisoners in Fortress Diwa in Chester.
Hey, okay, this image you're showing right here, I believe it's probably 5th century, maybe 6th century right here. Listen, this is very interesting that you should show this, because before there were 12 signs of the zodiac, almost all Near Eastern civilizations divided the heavens into quadrants. And there was a man quadrant, a phoenix quadrant, a bull quadrant, and a lion quadrant.
Yes.
And it was later that signs were added between these to create 12 divisions of the 360-degree celestial sphere. But the very oldest representations of the Mulapan, which is the original division of the heavens in ancient Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, Babylon, and the Amorites, was this right here. It was these 4. It was the phoenix, that later became the eagle, and sometimes the scorpion. It was the phoenix, the bull, the lion, and the man. Those are the four corners of heaven. And
yes,
the pole star at the top. You had the 4 corners of heaven that marked the four corners of a celestial pyramid. At the top of the celestial pyramid was the pole star. That was the eye of God that looked down on the creation.
Yes, and of course the halo that is behind Jesus's head is also a zodiac, divided into the 4 quadrants. So
Across
if you look
the zodiac, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So if you look at an Irish cross, a standard Irish cross with the circle and the cross going across the circle, that is a zodiac. We're dividing the zodiac into the 4 quadrants, as you say. So yeah, most of this comes back to these people being Sabaeans. John the Baptist was a Sabaean. It says so.
You talking about the original occupants of like Petra, Jordan, Sabaeans?
Yeah, no. Well, the famous Sabaeans were down from Yemen, from Saba. But the Sabaeans were star worshippers. Saba in ancient Egyptian, means the star. Yeah. So the Sabaeans down in Yemen, which is where I say Islam first came from. The first temple of the Kaaba is actually down in Yemen at Marib.
Oh yeah, they sure as hell didn't come from Mecca.
Yeah, well, the temple in Yemen at Marib was called the Temple of Mecca. So, yeah.
So you're agreeing that the modern Mecca is not the origin of
it's not the original
Islamic worship.
And the Temple of Mecca, of course, they don't understand what the name means. The Temple of Mecca is the Temple of Mecca Tamar, who was one of the wives of. She was the daughter of Solomon, I think, if I'm remembering this correctly. Anyway, one of the queens was called Mecca Tamar, and she was linked, of course, as they all were, to Isis and Venus, and but she became deified, and so her name as Mecca became semi-sacred, as it were. Anyway, that's a bit of a. It's worth actually going through, because that is an interesting story, but it's quite a long story, and we don't have time for that.
Well, I'll tell you what we do have time for. We have time for you to schedule a return to Archaix so we can talk about some more of these topics.
Yes, we can waffle on about all of these. Yeah,
I can nerd out all day. I can nerd out all day about this type of stuff.
Yeah, ancient hidden mysteries. Now, the funny thing about this temple, which is another reason, and it's another long story, but I'll cut it short and we'll go through it later. This temple was destroyed. So the first thing about this temple is you can see the symmetry here, how it was laid out. So these circles I've drawn in here are the layout circles for how you draw the Vesica Piscis in this temple. Yeah. Now, the archaeologists on site didn't know how this was laid out, and they didn't know the metrology of it, because they said it's not Greek, it's not Roman, it's not British. What they didn't look at is they didn't look at Egyptian measures. This was built in Egyptian cubits, and it's in precise numbers of Egyptian cubits. Now, this temple was built in AD 72, just after the Jewish revolt. Of course, it was built by Vespasian. He was in command at the time, and it was destroyed. So it was destroyed at the turn of the century. So it only lasted 25 years or so, and they destroyed it. Why? Well, if this had been a prison fortress, all of the prisoners would have been fairly old by that time. They'd all be dead by the turn of the century, and so there's no need for this fortress anymore. All the prisoners have died. But then they rebuilt it, and this is the second temple, and you can see it's to the same design, but the layout circles are now slightly larger. They're 80 cubits instead of 70 cubits, and they've been pushed further together to make it slightly more circular, but it's the same temple, built in the same place on the same foundations. So they rebuilt it. Why did they rebuild it? Well, this second temple was built at the time that Elagabalus was kicked out of Rome. So here's another name that people won't be familiar with. Emperor Elagabalus was a Roman emperor of the 220s AD. And he was the second Jesus, because he came from the same location. He came from Emesa instead of Edessa. We were talking about Edessa, but the town below Edessa was called Emesa. He was the king, or the priest king, as it were, of Emesa, from that royal family. And he managed to become emperor of Rome. And he was a Galli. He was a Galilean, the same as Jesus was a Galilean. We've not been through the Galli priests yet. The Galli priests were the castrated eunuch priests of the Near East.
Yeah, we don't have time to get into that one right now.
Well, you can if you want. How much time do you want?
Well, we don't have time to get into the galley priests. We might have to do a whole video for that one.
We might, yes. But anyway, so Emperor Elagabalus was a galley. He was a castrated galley.
Wow.
And of course, he wasn't greatly liked in Rome. And he was kicked out. He was murdered. Well, I think he was kicked out. They say he was murdered because they didn't like these strange Eastern ways, and he was murdered. But I think he was actually kicked out. And the same fate as Jesus, he was sent to the same Guantanamo Bay in Britannia as Jesus was, for the very same reasons. And because he came from the same region with the same religion, he built the same temple on the same place in the same fortress. And this is the second temple, the temple of Elagabalus. And we know that this was built at the time of Elagabalus because under the flagstones was a coin of Emperor Elagabalus, as if someone actually wanted you to know when this second temple was built.
You know, that was a tradition for a while. It didn't last long, but I really liked it. That
Yes.
when they were laying these buildings down, they would put a coin of the realm.
Yep. Even my father did that when we built something. It was a greenhouse or something in the garden, and he put a coin under the foundations of it.
Yeah.
Not that anyone would really care about our our greenhouse in the garden, but this is what the temple is supposed to have looked like. At the time, this was AD 70. Remember, Britain had only been conquered in AD 43, so this was very shortly after it had become Roman. This was the finest building in the whole of Britannia when it was first built. So someone put a lot of time and energy into making this temple, which should not be sitting in a fortress at all. And this is what it sort of looked like. And it was open to the air, of course, probably had a fountain in the middle because they found these water pipes going into the center of this temple. And of course, the water pipes were all stamped with Vespasian on them, so you know the date of it. Yes, it had this water feature in the center, and I write a little bit about that because I speculate on what they were trying to do there. So yes, the possibility is that Jesus, as the prince and king of Edessa, was captured after the Jewish revolt failed and sent to this prison fortress in Britannia to live out the rest of his life as far away from Judea as possible. And so there would have been correspondence, because I think there was one letter sent. It's the letter of Bar Serapion. It's a very famous letter, and if you read it, it reads like one of these captured people in Fortress Diwa writing back to their friends and family back in Judea, but a very censored letter, because it's a letter from that Rome would approve of. So it's been through the censors.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt that they would have looked for codes, they would have looked for subtext, they would have looked for anything in that. Yeah, you're right.
But it's lamenting their position, saying we fought a good fight, but we lost, and the Romans were right to defeat us, and all of this. It reads just as a letter would be sent from this fortress back to the people of Judea. And of course, it's writing about the wise king of the Jews, who is Jesus.
That's crazy.
So yeah, there's lots of reasons for thinking that Jesus was actually imprisoned in Fortress Diwa from AD 72 on to whenever he would have died. And of course, they would not let him out. They would not let his corpse or his bones go back to Judea, because they would be used as a focus for revolt again. So he would have been buried, or I think he would have been buried, because the reason they were doing this was to placate all of his friends and family and the powerful monarchy in Edessa, and remember that the powerful monarchy in Edessa could, if needs be, call upon the Parthians to whom they were related. And we go through all of the relations between Edessa and Parthia, because it was King Agbarus who was sorting out a lot of the problems in the monarchy in Parthia. They were on good terms. Edessa, if necessary, could call on Parthia to go and attack Rome.
I was just explaining to you that the crossover here is Macedonian ancestry.
So they had to be nice to this guy. They didn't want to upset them too much. So I think he would have been buried with some degree of ceremony in Britannia. And I speculated, there's a lot of information before we get to why. I speculate that he would have been buried in Stonehenge as being, because Stonehenge was no longer used. After Rome came to Britannia, Stonehenge went totally out of use. And so you had a vast monument there sitting on the plains of Wiltshire, which would be a dramatic setting for any burial for some famous king. I just got the impression they might have buried Jesus at Stonehenge, because remember, the father of King Arthur and the son of King Arthur were both supposed to be buried at Stonehenge.
So what about, I have a question. What about who do you think, who is the large, it was a large skeleton with a petite female. Who do you think was actually underneath Glastonbury Tor in the 12th century when they excavated that?
I think that was a later the church trying to get in to the relic,
because they tried to claim it was Arthur and Guinevere.
Yes. Yeah, I think they just wanted extra trade, and there's a whole history of churches doing this, saying that they've got, famous relics, the cross of Jesus and the thumb of a priest and so on. It was a good way of generating income by getting a pilgrim trade to come to your church. I see no evidence that the Arthurian story is actually linked to Glastonbury, because I link the Arthurian. I've got a whole book on that. Have I got it here? No, I don't think I have. Anyway, I've got a whole book on Arthurian legend called The Grail Cipher. There we go. The yellow one down the bottom, which is saying that the Arthurian legend is a retelling of the gospel story.
Okay. So you have a lot of books. You have a lot of material. It's 2:20, and I got to be somewhere at around 3:15.
Right.
So it's been a year. It's been exactly a year. So technically, we have traveled the entire zodiac, and you have come back to Archaix. But we need to do something like once a month or something. You have too much going through this book here, The Tempest and Exodus.
Yes.
You have way too much material to try to abbreviate into a single video or two videos. I can actually pick multitudes of topics, because we've done research on similar things, especially Old Testament type histories. I would really like to go through a lot of this material with you and because you blown my mind on the Jesus deal. That's it. I'm glad that I'm not wrong, but then again, I wasn't entirely right either. So I'm really cool with that. I'm cool with it.
As I say, it's the same story, just slightly different.
Yep, same story,
a different interpretation.
So I'd like to invite you back. I'll have Big John schedule you whenever's convenient with you. I said my community absolutely loves these type of discussions. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's good. And for anyone listening out there, this is all new material. You won't find it in any other books. I gather my material from the ancient chronicles. I don't read other theologians very much, especially the modern ones. I don't find a lot of the modern ones that useful. I tend to use old theologians like the Victorian, Adam Clarke and so on are very good. So this is all new material, but it is the same story with a different interpretation placed upon it. And the thing I like about my interpretation is it makes sense of a lot of things that didn't make sense before. Very quickly we were talking about why Saul was arresting people in Galilee. Well, under my story, you now have an explanation for that. And that happens time and time again as we go through. Yes, this is the crown of thorns. Of course.
I love this picture. This is so awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, this is another example of, we get this odd story about why was Jesus given a crown of thorns? Well, the Edessan crown was a crown of thorns.
That's
So
so crazy, man. There's crossover with Druidism here.
yeah,
So
and not only a crown of thorns, it's a plaited crown of thorns. If you look at it, it's plaited,
yeah,
and that's exactly what it says in the gospel story, of course.
man, it's so crazy. All right, Ralph, it's been great, and I'll definitely get you back in a month or so, and whenever's convenient to you. And this time, I don't know, we may talk about the Exodus, talk about the Hyksos, talk about that.
Yeah,
that
that's interesting.
talk about it. I mean, everything from the flood all the way to the Exodus. That's a lot of intriguing history.
Yeah. Yeah. Good to be on the show again, and we'll talk to you later.
All right, man. See you later, man. I like Ralph. And it's a rare thing. It's a rare thing for me to, yeah, you guys already know, I've already demonstrated, I'm very well read, but the explanation of the gospel stories as being more mundane events, ritual, slay of hand, this right here changes a lot, because now it kind of opens up a new thread of research I'm not proud of ignoring. But I told you guys, I totally ignored the whole idea about Jesus going to deal. I didn't, because it didn't fit with the gospel narrative. Jesus went up into the sky. So I don't want to research all this pseudo-biographical material about him going to London and England. I figured it was just made up by monks, but I can be wrong. But it also opens up another can of worms. So I have the books. You guys know my library is massive. I have the books. I can go look at them. But now it introduces a whole new element of research that other people have specialized in and I have ignored, and that's bloodlines. So I'm going to have to, when it comes to bloodlines, I'm going to have to, yeah, when Ralph comes back on, I may ask him about that, because now we have to try to trace an Edessian bloodline. Maybe this is something Michael Tsarion knows about too. Kind of makes you wonder who's who in politics today. So that's my talk with Ralph Ellis today. Great man, extremely learned, very impressed with him. And believe me, we could have stretched this out 6 hours and still not covered everything. Awesome material. Guys, I have got to go. This has been 2.5 hours of absolute bliss. I will be listening to this and reading the chat when I come back in this evening. But I will talk to you guys later. I'm going to get this badass outro out, but I got to shower and change and go meet Pops. Let's see. Anyway, until later, talk to you guys. We got Leaving Babylon. I believe it's Leaving Babylon, our next podcast. Her name is Madeline. You guys know these people better than I do, but I'm looking forward to that. Love you.